So GoldenEye's getting a re-release. Is it still good? Or am I just some bitter old guy who'd rather live in the past?
Fuck y'all!
Or I can't get the image of Pierce Brosnan sneaking up on 3 people. In a tank. I'm gonna find out. And here's the first roadblock. This fucker right here. We only have one stick, and some buttons and a really weird configuration. So how do you design an FPS that needs precise aiming? You kinda just have to cheat.
You cheated bastard!
Alright, so the joystick's used to move, and immediately we have a problem. Movement's really slow, and you can't really look up and down with the stick by itself. So that's where the LSC buttons come in. If you've ever used a button to look up or down, you know that it feels like shit. Because you can't adjust the speed the same way you would with the stick, so you get this really bad jerky movement that makes you feel robotic. So using C up and C down to look up and down is rarely necessary, which I'm guessing was intentional because they knew how bad it was. C left and C right strafe, and for some reason you can sidestep faster than you can run with the stick. It means that in order to move at maximum speed, you need to be constantly strafing. This one's weird, but I'm guessing that there are a lot of people who still do this as a reflex. And then you have your basics. Fire with Z, interact and reload with B, swap weapons with A, and aim with R. Aiming with R is a little weird because it swaps the stick from movement to aiming. So reloading has no animations. Gun goes down, gun comes up, and you got a full clip. Now that's just silly. We're not going to get reload animations until Perfect Dark. Another problem is that I don't have a 64 controller. I'm using one of these. First problem is that the 64 has these 6 buttons on the right and the 360 pad only has 4, which is standard for a modern control. The obvious solution is to put the C buttons on the right stick, which I tried. Within seconds I developed carpal tunnel, because the stick has a range value rather than a binary value. Long story short, the stick will register a button press at the halfway point, and that makes the stick feel like shit. So here's my solution, which is far from perfect, but if it stops my hand from fucking exploding after playing 2 levels, then it's good enough. Now we have the controls figured out, we can finally run into our first enemy. Let's just call him Gary. Gary's trying to kill you, obviously. And once he spots you, he's going to be following and shooting you until you deal with him. But how does he do it? We're going to put on invincibility, and we're going to watch what he does. Gary runs through a series of preset animations, such as stand and shoot, turn and shoot, hip fire, crouch and shoot, and my favourite, roll and shoot. You notice that there's a really big delay in between shots, which can be abused by hiding, because once he starts the animation, he's locked in. He's not stopping to reposition, so if an enemy spots you, you do have a grace period where you can hide. We can hide using objects, because Gary will usually only shoot if he has a clear line of sight, and even if he does shoot, he's going to miss. If we shoot Gary, it interrupts his animations, which is really important because it lets you manage multiple guards by combining positioning and hit stun to avoid damage. Bond will move his wrist to track Gary, which seems pretty aggressive for an auto aim, but if you're designing an FPS with a single stick, it's probably the best option they had. I haven't seen arm movement like this since Trespasser. Gary's total health will change depending on the difficulty. 1 chest shot on Agent, 2 chest shots on Secret Agent, and about 3 on 00 Agent. Granted, those aren't exact values for damage. I'm sure the wiki has those answers. Gary will also do more damage to you, and will be more accurate on higher difficulties. So if you end up getting hit, Bond gets pushed in the same direction the bullet was travelling. If you get hit in GoldenEye, you know where it's coming from because you're pushed in the same direction. The only real problem with being pushed back is that you can get stun locked if you're pushed into a wall or a corner. It seems to happen a lot with explosions. The standard FPS is usually a test of reflexes, whereas GoldenEye is more about hit stun, positioning, and enemy management. So the gameplay loop involves tricking enemies into attacking, having them miss, and then taking advantage of it. Which probably looks ridiculous to an observer, but it's still really fun. I imagine that when people see the gameplay that they would feel the same way I would about classic Doom. I really don't get it. Yeah, sorry, so I'm doing the GoldenEye video, right? Can you show me how to play Doom properly?
No. Is there anything that stands out, Justin, at all? In that area? Anything that stands out to you in this area that you just walked past?
This wind? That stands out, but I can't get there. Like,
no, it's not that. that you did not notice how much it stood out. In fact,
it's okay. It's not that obviously.
And the fact that you literally just ran past it 2 more times.
Oh my god. Okay, what just was it? The brown dude that just fired that at? Yeah, it is. Okay.
Yeah, it was the brown dude, Justin.
What's his...
called an imp.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
Amateur hour over here. What does John Romero like to do? Do you remember?
Make you his bitch.
Yeah, he does like to do that. Okay, Justin. We talked about not shooting a barrel. It's like rule number 1.
I don't like this. I think I'm gonna die.
Do the bait. Move in and then back away from the pinky. You'll be fine. Incredible recovery.
Oh.
Everyone thought it was over, but not me.
Weapon variety is pretty good. It's not quite Turok levels of insanity. Usually you'll start out with a pistol, which is shockingly accurate. And most of the enemies have an AK that's, let's just be honest, it looks like 2 black pencils put together. So you got pistols, submachine guns, snipers, shotguns, explosives, and lasers. The weapons feel pretty distinct. Pistols are pretty good for being accurate and discreet, especially the silenced pistol. Machine guns are really good at clearing rooms and stun-locking enemies. The sniper can pick off enemies at long distance. There are weapons that only exist in certain levels, and there are weapons that are just fucking amazing. Then there's explosives, that are really good for fucking up the mission objectives. Not to mention the tank, which can fire an explosive round, and is capable of flattening Gary. You can really tell how good a weapon is almost immediately. Something like the AR-33 will kill really quickly, it's got a small zoom when you aim, and it can pierce through most objects. Which are qualities that most weapons don't have. On the other end there's the Klopp, a submachine gun that has low damage, shit accuracy, it doesn't pierce objects, it sounds weak, and generally wastes pistol ammo. But you can wield 2 of them. You'd think that hearing 30 different versions of the Bond theme would be repetitive, but what if you put in some riff? What if we mixed it with Faith No More? Added some Led Zeppelin. What about the Bond theme plus Rage Against the Machine?
Teacher stands in front of the class, but the lesson plan he can't recall. The student's eyes don't perceive the lies, bouncing off every fucking wall.
Kinda goes without saying, but the soundtrack's amazing. Every track really complements the level that they're assigned to. They even made a trap version of the Bond theme for the pause menu. Keep in mind, this was 1997. So the levels are shockingly accurate recreations of the movie. They put in as much detail as they could on limited hardware. The attention to detail is kinda crazy. The level objectives will vary depending on the difficulty. On Agent, it's usually just do one objective and find the exit. On 00 Agent, it gets a little more complicated. A few levels in particular are a bit of a nightmare on 00 Agent. Facility has a lot of tight corridors and enemies that can flank you. Not to mention that you need to find Dr. Doak, who's in a randomized location, which might force you to explore the entire level. Archives is a claustrophobic maze, and it seems to have infinite enemy spawns. There's a ton of blind spots and intersections, and worst of all, there are 2 NPCs. Mishkin, who you need to talk to, and he refuses to move an inch. He doesn't give a shit that bullets are flying past his head. And then there's Natalia, who freaks out when she sees you, runs into enemies and gets herself killed. This is not the only level where this happens. Control. Where to begin with Control? You have turrets that tear you in half, which appear in several rooms, and you have to defend Natalia from a swarm of guards while she hacks a terminal. Usually this part's hell, but I watched a speedrun where some guy just stands there in one place, and you can cut off the enemies pretty easily. Couldn't beat this one because I was a stupid kid. Caverns has one major problem, and personally I think they went a little overboard with this one. There's this room that has enemies, scientists, a radio, and a control pump. The problem is that there's explosive barrels at the back, and glass covering the entrance. So the first thing that happens is the enemy sees you, throws a grenade that bounces back, and it kills the scientists, which fails the mission. Then it destroys the radio, which also fails the mission. Once the enemies are dead, you need to activate the radio, get the scientists out, and destroy the pump. Fuck this room. Then there's Aztec, one of the secret levels, and it's unlocked by beating all the previous missions on Secret Agent. It is by far the hardest level. All the enemies will either have an AR-33 or some lasers, both of which hit hard. Enemies will infinitely respawn after a certain point. You have to kill Jaws, who is armoured, so hit stun doesn't work on him initially. And he has dual AR-33s, because of course he does. You have to travel back and forth between the exhaust bay to get all the required items. You have drone guns, and you need to go up and down this ladder to open and close the exhaust bay. And while you're climbing, you can't do shit in terms of defending yourself. You get the Moonraker laser though, that's fun. There's also cheats to unlock in every level, if you can beat them on a certain difficulty, and under a certain time. The first one you unlock will probably end up being DK mode, which you get for beating Runway on Agent in under 5 minutes. Which you're gonna do even if you're not aiming for it, because the level's extremely short. That way the game can tell you it has cheats without telling you it has cheats. Eventually Rare did make a follow-up in Perfect Dark, which improves the game in many ways, but without the restraints of the Bond IP. Unfortunately, I didn't have that game growing up, but you know who did? Cousin Mike. Perfect Dark has more of a sci-fi setting, especially towards the end of the game. Guns now have proper reload animations, which makes the pistols more useful. Most weapons have an alternate fire, and some of the gimmicks they get are pretty out there. Weapons can be shot out of enemy hands, and mission objectives are a lot more complicated than GoldenEye's. Is it a better game? Yeah, maybe.
I was always better.
Time Splitters was kind of a spiritual successor, and the game is alright, but the controls feel horrible, the auto-aim's not tuned right, and there's no hit indicators, which is a problem because the enemies are perfectly accurate, so you feel like a punching bag. There's also Agent 64, kind of fan project that has a demo on Steam. The first level's playable and it looks really promising. It's a little rough in its current state, but it's definitely got the feel of the game pretty close to the original. And finally there's the cancelled 360 port of GoldenEye that leaked online. It was pretty much complete, but still had a lot of bugs that were never fixed. Right off the bat, the background music cuts out at a certain point. If the original, with its stretched face textures and nonsensical backgrounds, looks too primitive, then this version might be the one for you, which is what I would say if it didn't just crash and delete my save. So after all this talk, does GoldenEye still work?
Whoa, look at this. Now you can say you've seen Boney.
Yeah.